Oh, we're live. And I'm wearing sunglasses because I kind of messed my eye up a bit. It's all messed up. Got KO'd by a drill thing that flew off when I was working on something. How you going? Hope everybody's having a fantastic Sunday. Grow Green Daddy, Aussie Autos, Jay, Coco, Dank Panda, man, all the way from Canada again. Ether, Sweet Baby May, Devil Grows, Green and Mason, and Umbra. Hope everyone's going good. A bit late on this morning, had a few technical difficulties trying to get the Instagram to sync with the restream. So yeah, again, we're live on YouTube, Twitch, should be Facebook and Instagram. And I'm responding through HPO Grows today. So yeah, I can sort of get at you on there. Shows. So yeah, I thought we could maybe go over some foliar feeding tips, perhaps talk a little bit about IPM strategies, and yeah, get into some questions. So I will check the chat as well. We've got chat. You can respond on Twitch or YouTube or Facebook. And it all comes in there. So yeah, foliar feeding. What are the advantages? When should you do it? When should you cut it out? There's a lot of key advantages to foliar feeding, particularly in the instance of when you've got nutrient deficiencies. It's if you can get it right, it's pretty immediately available, and therefore you can solve some problems pretty quickly. The other advantage is when you have a root system that's compromised. Sometimes foliar feeding can help keep the plant going in such a way that if you can keep the vigor, the root system will repair. So yeah, one there from Aussie Autos that he's never foliar fed anything. It's a little bit of some people aren't quite sure when to do it or how to do it. It might seem kind of obvious, but one of the main things you want to do is actually make sure it sticks to your leaf. So if you're not using something that has an inclination to do that, then you might want to add something like a saponin along with your application to make sure that what you're applying doesn't just sort of form a bead, almost like after you've polished a car, like a waxy cuticle, right? So if you've got wax on something, then you spray it with water, you just get little droplets that kind of sit on the outside. So having something that breaks that surface tension a bit enables that to coat the leaf surface and kind of stick to it a little bit more, which can help both if you're spraying for pests, but also help if you're sort of, trying to get things to absorb. We've got Luke, we've got Oswald. Hey, big Oswald. And one there from Baby May, Green Supreme, and one there from Green and Mason, Green Supreme. So that's, in terms of the HPO universe, that's the stuff that I like to really foliar the most. It's probably most of the time the only thing that I foliar. Although I have taken over the last sort of 6 to 8 months of using a little bit of mojo in some foliar stuff as well, which has shown some pretty cool effects synergistically with the Green Supreme. The Green Supreme isn't so much a food, so much as it's kind of an enhancer. So you're enhancing the metabolic rate of your plant. That's a big word for a Sunday for some reason. You're enhancing the immune response of your plant and the nutrient uptake. And there is some of that, the things like fulvic and certainly amino acid applications have shown effects when applied by foliar. There are studies to support it and anecdotal evidence out the wazoo on that sort of stuff. Some questions there about rice hulls that I will get to in a minute. I will. Yes, he's got the pencil. I love it when disorganized me sorts out organized me. It's fantastic. So we'll talk about hulls in a minsies. Cobain, how you doing? And the volume. I'm coming through, like people can hear me. I'm pretty sure that I can see that I've got audio going through to the restream, so hopefully. If not, let me know. um, any benefit to foliar feeding a seedling? Yes and no. I mean, if it's too early in the seedling's life, like say it's just come up and you've basically just got something there with cotyledons, there's not a great amount of benefit of foliar feeding at that point. Kind of just let it do its thing, establish a bit. Once you've got, preferably a couple of sets of nodes of true leaves, then you can feel free to kind of augment and experiment with that sort of stuff. But yeah, I wouldn't sort of, you're not really going to get a lot of benefit of foliar feeding at that point. Once they sort of, you start to see the first set coming out, you can sort of drench with a tiny bit of Green Supreme and Mojo. And that has shown like quicker establishment. But yeah, as for the foliar, just wait till they're kind of going a bit and then they can actually utilize that a bit more. The camera's decided to do some cool stuff. That's always mad. There we go. Sweet, cool. My webcam is sick. Yeah, the Mojo glasses weren't quite dark enough for today, unfortunately. Yeah, I mean, just a PSA too. We all do it. It's like that's a 2-minute job, like that's not really gonna. I shouldn't throw safety glasses on or anything like that. I'll just go and grind that piece off, and that'll be fine. And that's the time when you're like, you could put an eye out. So, like Mum used to say, you'll put an eye out doing that. I nearly could have put an eye out. So, throw your sunnies on at least, I guess. I'm wearing them on here. Should have been wearing them when I was fiddling around with angle grinders and Dremels. Well, as long as the audio is good, then that's fine. The rest of me can be completely early 2000s / late 90s. I'm fine with it. Thank you, Outdoor Cat and Ninja, for the props there, bro. It took me forever to find a vintage webcam, and then my internet connection was too fast, so I had to slow it down enough so that it's like of a sufficient level of crappiness. But I like it. Thank you. I'm barely visible on screen. It's terrific. Harrison, how you going? And yeah, agreed there from Otto. Like, just they're cool, but also wear just some eye protection. All right, so let's get back to the foliar, to spraying things. So yeah, I mean, you can foliar feeding. I mean, there's actually applying fertilizers, foliar, which is kind of what I was alluding to earlier. Or then there's applying biostimulants by foliar application. And some of those have shown some terrific results. Fulvic acid is quite notable for that. Again, amino acids quite notable for that. I notice a lot of greening of the plant. You get some pretty ridiculous leaves, especially if you're sort of applying at the upper end. If your scoop is a slightly rounded scoop versus a flat scoop, for instance. But yeah, it's those sort of biostimulants are effective and they can work in tandem. So sometimes things like, well-absorbed stuff like magnesium sulfate or potassium sulfate, those sort of langbeinite, those things can be utilized effectively by foliar. Other products of our range that I tend to foliar is the aquamarine, which might sort of sound a little bit sort of, if you've used the product, it has a pronounced odor. It's lesser so in water, I've got to say, but it's still there. But that is very effective on veg plants, very effective on plants that are sort of in the very earliest phases of flowering, which kind of brings me around to timing. So Aussie Auto's asked about kind of when to start it. So generally with your clones or with your seedlings, you're going to want to, start that sort of stuff when your plants are moving in an upward direction. So just focus on allowing them to establish, and whether they be a clone or whether they be a seedling, wait until you've got, a set of leaves in the case of a clone, or a couple of sets of leaves in the case of a seedling. But with regard to when to stop it, you sort of don't want to be spraying too much into flowering. So in the earliest phases, say week 1 up to around 10 days, you're pretty safe. There are some people that spray into mid-flower. I'm not really one of those people. I tend to cut it out, and not really. A lot of that comes from sort of older experience with just rot in things. And so, water equaled spoilage, and spoilage is no good. So while you might be able to get a little bit more yield that way with certain cultivars, the risk of it not working out was the juice wasn't worth the squeeze most times. So yeah, I don't recommend foliaring in flower, nor do I recommend even having to spray for pests in flower if you can absolutely avoid it. Everything kind of builds up on those flowers. They tend to be a bit of a magnet for that sort of stuff, and especially the particularly tight clusters. It's very difficult once things are on there to kind of get them out. So preferably you're sending your plants into the flowering phase healthy, and you don't have a situation where you have endemic pests that you're kind of not so much solving, but just kind of keeping at bay all the time. And then you won't have to spray in flowering, which is really the best way to ensure quality. While there are some things that are, safe in terms of like they're not going to kill you, I can't imagine they're going to improve or result in a net improvement in your quality, aside from the fact you would actually achieve a harvest. But sometimes, a heavy infestation of mites at week 4 that forces someone to apply a bunch of stuff to get it through to week 8. The stuff they get at week 8 might be anywhere near as worthless or close to as the stuff they would have thrown away at week 4 and just started again with. So you can kind of, leverage that a little bit. Sometimes that's farming. All right, I'll say hello to a few more people. Addy-tastic. And one there from Otto, just quickly. Can you foliar during lights on? I try and get them in sort of the last hour before the lights turn off. And with the LEDs, or even with the digital HID ballasts, you can turn those down a bit. So do that. Turn them down a bit. Do your foliar application. And like I said, most of the time we're dealing with plants that are in the vegetative phase or at the very earliest phases of flowering at the most. So that extra humidity is not really too much of an issue. And you should have adequate dehumidification / airflow through your grow to where they can handle that sort of stuff anyway. You really always want to try and have enough to deal with the plants plus extra, if possible. Deacon, g'day to you. Otto, if you foliar aquamarine, the missus will kick you out. It's just a risk you're going to have to take, unfortunately. But it does work quite effectively. DJ Bovo. Aussie Auto's too scared to spray and veg. Give it a go. Just give it a go with a bit of Green Supreme. You'll see how it works. It works quite well. I haven't used that particular product, but yeah, I haven't really. I know people that use it overseas. And some recommendations for various oil sprays there, as in, essential oils, kind of confusing the pests and throwing them off the trail. Useful IPM. Dingo. Razor. And yeah, and the other thing, so surface tension, that sort of covers some of the application, but where you also want to focus on applying the sprays is up and under the leaves. So this goes for your pest sprays, IPMs, or foliar feeds. You want to get over the top, but you also want to get up and underneath things. There's a utility with doing that on a regular basis to where you are sort of keeping things clean, especially if you're applying stuff that's sort of not too residual or sticky. Even just doing it with water, you'll see plants really quite like that. It's a technique that a lot of people do with their house plants, just to rinse off dust and all that sort of stuff. Helps keep the leaves clean. Clean leaves are efficient leaves. So yeah, but for your pests, a lot of pests where they actually hide is up and under the leaves. So spraying there is how to sort of target them. Their damage appears on the top of the leaf, but they are normally, especially in the case of mites, hanging out underneath there. And yeah, for your foliar applications of things, you will get more absorption if you get both. So try and go. You can tilt the end of your sprayer around so that it will sort of, up and under the leaves. If you use a paint sprayer, which is what I prefer for all that sort of stuff, because I can get a very fine mist and droplet, then you can actually sort of, they have an L-shaped sort of hose inside them that sucks the water up out of the container. You'll find when you tilt it backwards that it's pointed forwards. Just twist it around so that it's actually pointed downwards towards the bottom of the thing, and then you can actually spray up underneath things, and then twist it back around again and do the top. Okay, so yeah, so anyway, that's some tips on that. If there's any questions on that, just throw them in the comments / things there, and we will, I'll answer that. We'll do my best to answer that. Question there on Ocean Potion. Yeah, I mean, effectively, that's what the Ocean Potion was kind of developed for. So it became pretty apparent once LEDs moved out of the blurple phase. Wait a minute, where's the blurple? There's kind of like what the spectrums used to look like there. A little bit of blurpliness, maybe a little bit of blurpliness over here. There's a mirror screen going on. Give me a break. Come on, yeah, all right. So colors. When they moved out of that phase and they moved into the sort of clear white, the full spectrum LEDs, it became pretty apparent that Cal Mag uptake, really all of that sort of stuff had to be tuned up a little bit. Aquamarine and Ocean Potion were kind of developed in that light. So yeah, it supplies supplementally calcium in some forms that are soil safe, so you're not having to use nitrates or things that are going to kind of affect the bricks content of your plants by depleting amino acids to perform conversions. And the calcium and magnesium in forms that are kind of working with your soil biology to an extent. Stone Age always, though, especially in the peat-based blends. So it's effective. I like to particularly run it with the light soil. With the full spec, it's arguable if you really need it in the first run. I don't tend to use a lot of it. But yeah, favouring the Ocean Potion a bit, just a couple of applications here and there. G'day, Harry. And yeah, paint sprayers are good. You can get some, I mean, the cheap $100-ish ones are probably as good as the more expensive ones. So yeah, just kind of, you don't need to pay an enormous amount for them. Some of them have attachments for larger tanks, which is handy. The smaller ones, the cheaper ones, really only have about 1 litre, I think is the capacity of mine. So you might have to mix up a bucket and sort of refill it a couple of times, but they're very effective in terms of the droplet size is very small. So while you can get greenhouse foggers and things that are sort of built for that, with that purpose in mind, they're effective and they work. And I am yet to wreck one of the sprayers themselves. It's more the batteries by mistreating them. And yeah, well, there you go. One there from Otto. There apparently there's a 1.2 liter battery operated sprayer for $30, so even cheaper. Yeah, Otto always has the pro tips. He yeah, mad tips for days. Collins, get out of you. Yeah, grab the Cocoa Garden, grab your Wake and Shake, mix up your dose of Green Supreme and have at it, man. Amazing. Canberra Crops, nice to see you, brother. Man, that plant that you have at the moment is so much plant. It is a, yeah, it is a stout, very impressive bush. It's just completely overtaking the whole yard. And Jai, nice to see you. Otto dead. Gypsy, cool to have you on. Yeah. Why would we apply Ocean Potion as a foliar? More for the sort of stimulant side of it, more so than the CalMag side of it. Although it's going to have some benefit there. But yeah, it's normally more, I like the cytokines and things that it has in it. There's certain varieties that you really get some very impressive flowers if you sort of apply it nice and early. Seems to sort of promote a bit more outward structure. And yeah, it is a beast. It is that's Canberra Crow. If you haven't checked out his account, at Canberra Crops on IG, doing some amazing stuff in the ACT. Yeah. All right. Cool. So that's some stuff there on some thoughts on that sort of thing. If you have any other questions, feel free to throw them in there, or I will find some other stuff to ramble about. G'day, Danktan. Nice to see you. Plastic pots versus the breathable pots versus fabric pots was one that I sort of had. I get asked that a lot. Come here, camera. Do the thing. Yeah, wicked. Yeah, I get asked that one a bit. I'm a fan of any sort of a breathable pot, fabric pots, or whether they be those sort of the air pots, the funny looking kind of like a porcupine pot. I'm a fan of those as well. But yeah, anything that breathes, I think, is good for soil. The regular plastic pots are very convenient for smaller plants, very convenient for sort of veg growth because they're very easy to transplant out of normally. So yeah, they're convenient, but I mean, in an ideal world, you would grow everything in a breathable pot when it comes to soil, and I think that would be the most optimal. The one advantage that I've sometimes seen with the plastic containers is the ones that have the sort of inner lines on them do have an effect of directing the roots downwards, so that can be useful. And some of the sort of square ones, the rose style pots that are rounded on the corners, they fit together very conveniently. So there's that as well. But for final containers, I always like to see something that can breathe. I really just think that's optimal. Microbes need air, and the roots need air exchange to operate correctly. Your soil needs to breathe. So there's, yeah, that alone. Not to mention there is an evaporative cooling effect, particularly with the fabric pots, where having a wet piece of cloth and breeze equals some sort of cooling for the roots. And yeah, there's a lot of scope for that. I mean, there's a variety of different ones. I'm not going to shout out particular brands of them. There's just a huge amount of all those sort of, containers around. So I would say if you can use breathable / fabric pots, use those. Even if they're slightly less convenient, because normally you will get better plants, especially in soil. But what I would say is that plastic pots are very convenient in the vegetative phases. and the difference is a bit more marginal than what you would see in flour. Aussie Auto's there with the auto pots. So yeah, I think his system runs some fabric bags that are sub-irrigated by the auto pot valve system, which is an interesting one. So yeah, letting that take care of things Monday to Friday, working days, and then doing some manual watering. Yeah, Otto, that would be cool. That would be very cool. Don't mind my Bob Marley flag over there. I've had that since I was a kid. 43. Nice to see you. So yeah, with regard to pots versus beds, that's a bit more of a preference thing. I tend to be more of a container person. I like pots, bags versus beds. But beds are very effective in that they're large and flat. And for a lot of people that are running things like blue mats often don't hit the whole bag. And so that sort of, works out for them. And sometimes, depending on the level of drying in your room, can, be of an advantage. But yeah, I tend to like the fabric bags in terms of I just think you get better drainage, which might sound weird. You sort of think like, okay, you've only got that much soil, so how could your drainage be better in a bag that's that big? But you've got more gravity and your water table is higher the shallower your soil is. So yeah, it's kind of that's why. I don't have a sponge, but I could demonstrate the effect. It's basically if you take a sponge and you soak it, it'll hold more water one way than it will the other. And yeah, that's the major benefit, and probably why I've grown to really prefer bags over beds is that portability. For a lot of people, things aren't always as locked in as they would like, and you've got to move things around. And a bed is very inconvenient for that, unless you've got like it on a pallet and you've got a pallet jack or something, and even then, that's pretty inconvenient. So yeah, containers and pots or bags. And yeah, sticky blooms for the win. Sticky blooms for all. Super awesome kind of merch and things around that. Lighter holders, doob tubes, shirts. Cool stuff. Grey Green Daddy rocking some 70-litre plastic tub sips. And yeah, a lot of oats there for the fabric pots. Yeah, it is difficult for some people to get away with a bed setup if you're in a rental, for instance. Yeah, you might not have the approval that you need. But yeah, roots need air as much as they need oxygen. So likewise with your microbes. Bruiser, nice to see you. I think I missed you last time on the last live, so it's definitely good to see you this time. Week's been pretty good. It was a bit of a long week, this one, but we got through it. So yeah, we're here. Yeah. So it's good. It's good to be back and talking about some cool garden stuff with you guys. Solving hydrophobicness. So if you've let your soil get way dry, or sometimes you've kind of been watering, but you haven't really been monitoring it, and your plant has just exploded in growth and has sort of gone from using the level that you were comfortably watering it at to just kind of exhausting a lot of that within a week. It happens. It means, your conditions are great and your plant has just decided to level up on you. But the downside of that is that you may not have kept up with its needs. So there's a couple of different approaches you can go to. Number one, again, getting back to what we were saying earlier about saponins and just trying to reduce the surface tension of your water. So if you probably in science class in school would have poured water into a glass and seen how it kind of domes, versus when you add a small amount of dish detergent, it kind of dishes a little bit. Breaking the surface tension of the water will enable it to soak into your soil. Some of the older tips used to recommend things like Castile soap or dish soap or things like that. I generally don't use those. Some people do. I think just saponins are a better way of going about that. So things like yucca, soap nut extract, or soap nuts, you can just simply get whole soap nuts and throw them in a bucket, throw a paint stirrer on the end of a drill, and then just agitate the hell out of that bucket, and you will get like a nice soapy mixture that you can just go and pour on the garden somewhere. There's of course saponins in our Green Supreme product that is sort of designed to aid with that. So when people are asking for recommendations from the stuff we make to help wet down their soil, that's the product that I will normally recommend. So that's number one. That's, you're going to need to apply maybe a little bit more water than you would in a normal watering for containers that are, say, too big to dip. And I'll get that to that in a second. But having that in the watering will actually help it absorb in. For smaller containers, what I will often do is I will sort of, if it's like say 100 to 150 ml pot, that will comfortably fit in a 20 litre builder's bucket. And so I'll mix up Green Supreme in that, or saponins, depending what I'm doing, and literally slowly submerge the pot under and wait until I don't see very many bubbles, and then allow that to drain freely to field capacity, which is quite effective. You generally won't find that this is sort of something that crops up as much in the Island blend, with it being cocoa based. It re-wets very, very easily. The grow dirts having peat and cocoa in the base do re-wet a bit easier, but even still, you're dealing with a predominantly peat base. So if it goes to too dry of a level, it's sometimes difficult to get them to take back on water. It'll just kind of pool or run around it. So the submerging of your pots works quite well for smaller containers. For bigger containers, what I generally recommend is kind of doing the same, mixing up something that's got a lower surface tension and wants to soak in, and then applying it with a fine spray versus pouring it on in a few different lots. And you might be surprised if you apply some, how much soaks in. You might get some runoff, but then if you go back in an hour and apply a bit more, you'll notice that a lot more soaks in. So for bigger containers, you might have to do it in stages to kind of get it back to where you want it. You can't really submerge those. So that is something that you can kind of do to sort of get them back on track. Like we were saying on the last live, dry roots to that extreme certainly are dead roots, and microbes don't like to go dry. They like just kind of a nice even level of moisture. So my way of thinking on it is even moisture level, even uptake, happy plants, happy microbes, everything's stable, happy garden. And we've got Dactyos and the Soil Farmer. There's some different recommendations for some, saponins. Yes, different ones. Yep. A few different recommendations there. So don't let your roots go too dry. While a little bit of dry back is good, you're ensuring that you're getting some oxygen in there. You don't want things to just go dry. That's not going to help anything. Plant roots can't really absorb anything in dry soil. microbes are not going to really be effective or happy or doing much. And it's going to cause diebacks on things like that are then going to take time to rebound again. So just try and avoid that by keeping things just nice and evenly moist. But yeah, if you do have things that go to that level, then, you know, you get wilting or whatever, trying some of that sort of stuff will help. And yeah, aloe as well, which again, that is in the Green Supreme. And Big Papa, nice to see you too. Canberra Crops likes to massage in the amendments to sort of stop any hydrophobicness. Things that have got proteins and fats in them are going to want to beat up. So bone meal is kind of a little bit like that. Various different plant-based meals, so soybean meal or hemp seed meal, certainly it's almost greasy in feel. Yeah. The pre-activation technique that I was talking about on the last one seems to solve all of that. By the time it goes into the soil, it absorbs water just completely perfectly. Still really, really liking that. And a couple of people are trying it at the moment and reporting some good results. So that's been great to see. So yeah, massage it in, or you can, do that. Activate it with the compost or castings like we recommended. Applying it before rain also helps, and applying it and then applying a layer of mulch on top also helps as well. Bit of a vote there for the light soil and some autos. Some people running that combo. And yeah, yeah, there's a bit of a debate between some people on, you know, Island Blend v light soil. There's advantages and disadvantages. They're both good blends. Both of them grow killer plants. So yeah, it's kind of a matter of preference. But there are some instances, like say if it's sub-irrigated, I tend to more recommend the light than the Island Blend. Because the light soil functions extremely well with top dressing. So sub-irrigated means less chances to apply things via watering them in. So having top dressing centric programs works really well with them. And the Island Blend works very well with solubles. So it's terrific for just mix up, water and drain style approach, almost like what a lot of people do with cocoa anyway. But they're kind of mixing up, buffering, pH checking EC and a bunch of things. It's a lot easier when you're just running aquamarine and ocean potion. If an simple suits you, some people prefer complicated. Exotic Alchemy, nice to see you. And Dankden there for the full spec, which is my personal favorite. Especially now it's got the granulated cork in it. It's ultra funky, extra funky. G'day, Richie. And Dankden wants to do some vegetables in the Island Blend this year. You know, I haven't really tried that much. But perhaps a vertical... I've seen these small pots that kind of hang on like a little vertical garden sort of a setup. You could put some herbs in there, and I reckon it'd be great for that. So I might actually try it. I'm getting really into my food garden lately. I've sort of had them on and off over the years, but sometimes you get busy and you sort of don't make time for things like that. Sometimes it's not so much not having time, it's not making time. And yeah, so that's sometimes what people misunderstand about the light. I more mean light in structure, more so than light in feeding. So it's maybe a little bit of a misnomer, or it's not quite fair to it. But it is still quite nutrient dense. Like you will grow plants in it just fine. It's not like it's an inert peat-based media and it's completely lacking. It's around 70 to 75% of the full spec, so you're not dealing with an enormous dearth of nutrition there. It's more the structure of it is light. So when you pick it up, it's like it weighs heaps less than what the full spec does. But yeah, when you water it, it dries back faster, holds less moisture, drains a bit easier. Land races, indeed. Yeah. So yeah, if you've got a water and you mix up your watering can and you water your plants every other day, sort of a system, the Island Blend's attractive for that, and you can certainly use the light soil that way. But if your system is sub-irrigated, aka auto pot, that sort of stuff, it's attractive for those because you can utilize the Herb Superb and Stone Age, or individual amendments if you're the sort that sort of likes to apply individual things or tailor your system, or your personal top dressings of choice. And which of the blends has the best potential for wicking? They all wick pretty good, to be honest. That's something that I try and design into them. So that's where, things like perlite do get well, it's not a perfect medium, right? There's waste associated with it. It has to be mined and it has to be processed. But in terms of effectivity, it's very effective. While I'm talking about perlite being that way, though, nothing is waste or energy input free. So even in the case of rice hulls, they still have to be, harvested, shipped, all that sort of stuff like that, processed. It maybe doesn't use as much energy, but perlite lasts forever. Rice hulls break down pretty quick. So, yeah, I think that was actually something that we were going to talk about too, rice hulls. So yeah, it kind of, they all wick pretty well. The Island Blend and the Light work very well, especially in 20-litre containers at wicking. So they're really good that way. Full spec. People like Brennan Mason use that in big sub-irrigated planters, and it does really well. So, and other people have said the same, running sub-irrigated, that it wicks up very well. The Gorilla Cell's quite chunky though, so I would say probably supplement with top watering that one a bit more. It's going to wick well, but you're going to have a lot of air in there, so drenching is a good idea. Sweet Organics. It does work tremendously well with drippers though. It's really sort of tailored for that. So, and which is what most guys that are outside are running. They're kind of, if they're running a watering system, it's normally drippers. And yeah. Perlite, yeah, it'll break up over time because it's crushable. So, but at the same time, like I've got beds that I've amended with perlite, God, 5 to 7 years ago, and it's still all very visible there. And I haven't added more perlite to it. Whereas the rice hulls I put in at the same time they're gone now, well and truly gone. So yeah, it's not entirely permanent. Like it's not entirely resistant to the actions of shovels or compaction. If you've ever picked it up, you can crush it easily in your hand, which means over time it's just going to turn to dust. How much abrasion it undergoes will determine probably how long it's going to take. That's one of the more interesting things about the granulated cork, actually, is it seems to be almost like the blob or the thing or something like that. Like you can't crush it. It just kind of springs back to shape. And when you hit it with a shovel, it just moves out of the way. It doesn't really chop in half easily. So yeah, pretty interesting. The breakdown of the rice hulls, though, is part of their benefit because yeah, they contribute some silica to the soil, which has been demonstrated in studies. Perlite, pumice, things like that are made of silica as well. They're just a rock, so it's not really going to be available. It needs to break down as anything else. Use a bit of mojo. Mojo helps with breaking, freeing up insoluble silica sources to available silica sources. But yeah, I don't tend to base all of the drainage on sorry, I'm getting DMs. I don't tend to base all of the drainage in a mix on rice hulls. I haven't found that to be very effective. They're good as a component, um, along with other things, but by themselves, I find them a little bit lacking. They don't wick tremendously well, if at all. Yeah, so there's advantages and disadvantages to them as a material. But yeah, they're sort of a bit more eco-friendly under some circumstances. But yeah, I don't rely on them exclusively in a mix. And Dr. Jimbo Jones, nice to see you. Nice to see you out doing ninja. We'll catch you next time. Nice to see you, Claire. And yeah, so some people asking about the cork. So we use granulated cork as a portion of the full specs. We started that towards the end of last year. We've been trialing it for over a year, and it was very, very good. It showed to be an improvement. So in a very dense media, it allows a little bit faster of a dry back. It's very light too, and it doesn't hold any moisture. So there's a lot of really cool advantages to it. Plus it's sustainable in a way because they don't cut the trees down. They just harvest the bark, and the bark is allowed to grow back. Yeah, so I mean, I really like a sort of diversity of drainage materials, bunch of different things, some coarse ones, you know, volcanic based stuff. So like your heavy mineral ores, pumice, scoria, that sort of stuff I really like. Chunky stuff. I also like, you know, some of the stuff like perlite. I've been known to use a bit of vermiculite, like in the super starter. A little bit of those things just from working in nurseries and all the rest of it. You know, and in the light soil, there's a bit of it in there. Same as Island Blends, a fair bit of it in there. It works well for those mixes. So yeah, I like a diversity of base materials. I think that, you know, longevity wise and just functionality wise, that's how I've found I can get more sort of, for me, user-friendly mixes, ones that sort of soak up or wick up or that sort of thing a bit easier. Nice to see you, Jason. Other people have good results with just like singular base materials and all the rest of it. But yeah, I tend to prefer a great diversity. I like diversity of amendments too. I think that just having observed really productive soils over the years, they're very rarely simple. They sort of normally have like a huge amount of different componentry to them, large particles, small particles. It's not, you know, yeah, there's not just sort of a couple of things there normally. So I guess trying to emulate that, but trying to emulate it with sometimes, you know, cool and I guess sometimes exotic ingredients is part of the fun. But, you know, they're not just random choices. They're things that we've sort of chosen because they've shown to be effective. Trust me, I've tried pulling perlite entirely out of mixes, and my personal experience was it was a lesser mix. It was easier to make it up in terms of like, you know, it's a dusty, annoying stuff to work with. So like, you know, yeah, there's that. But I found that functionality wise, it didn't work quite as well. So it stayed in there. And, you know, same as with the cork, it was like, okay, is this going to work? Tried it out. The first time I tried it, it really didn't because I had it at too low a level and experimented with ratios and then got it to a point where it's like, no, this actually is really quite cool and effective. You just need to replace a portion of the perlite with the cork. And it worked terrific. But yeah. Diversity is great. I think a diversity of base materials, a diversity of inputs. When I'm, you know, messing around, like say with that pre-activating of the top dressings, there's certainly certain ingredients in that will just explode with, you know, almost what looks like different microbes to the stuff next to it. It's probably just differences in sporulation with things feeding on it, but, or, you know, bloom sort of activity from them. But yeah, they're sort of, things tend to prefer different things. So feeding a diverse diet. Dank Den, they're rocking some of the Gorilla Soil. In fact, there's quite a few people that are rocking that this season. Both auto flowering plants, or because it's difficult to overwater it, it's quite chunky. Or with photo period plants, so some sort of what are getting to be sort of monsters. Yeah, and the season's dried out a bit too, so it's kind of alluding to those perhaps being successful. But Dankden, they're saying water only so far, and I think is running 20-litre pots or 25-litre pots from memory, so that's thumbs up there. Super happy. Yeah, so some people self-collecting pumice too. When you collect it from the sea, it's going to have a lot of sodium on it too, which I'm sure you're already aware about, and you can sort of soak it to kind of get rid of that a bit. Lactobacillus is like, semi-good at helping with that, / lactic acid is good at helping ameliorate some sodium, from your pumice. So, that can sort of, if you use a lot of collected pumice and you get some lockout, then maybe treating it that way can sort of help. And yeah, well, I mean, it's a choice with the diversity thing. Obviously, diversity is difficult to scale because, at one point it was 20-litre buckets, sacks of things that I had for making mixes turns into pallets of things. So you times that by the amount of ingredients that are in things. And then there's, keeping things on hand so that you can actually make those things all the time. It's kind of a bit like the game Whack-A-Mole. That's sort of about level 4 when they're really flying out of the front of it and you're trying to use the stick. but it's a choice because it's just what I think makes the best soil that we can certainly make. And yeah, for a lot of people that are using it, it's very effective. But yeah, we try and make it so that the full spec is has the most level of stuff that we can kind of put in there, and always trying to sort of level it up a little bit more. Yeah, so that's what I would say. The other advantage of having diversity in your base materials is you have some redundancy there. So say if you have like a really heavy rainfall season and you only used rice hulls and nothing else, and the structure of your mix was a fair bit fine, then you might get a lot of breakdown very quickly, and it's difficult to fix that on the fly. Having some other things in there that are going to hold a bit more structure is good. The peanut's kind of interesting in that way in the Gorilla Soil. It tends to be quite resilient, and the chunky peat moss and chunky biochar certainly seem to help as well. Grows Clover, hella nice to see you. Aussie Autos, the full specs like the Mary Poppins bag. It's like Felix bag of tricks. More ingredients than you can shake a stick at. There is more to that too. I'll sort of get into that eventually about procedural techniques for combining those things, because it's not just a case of just get them all, stick them all in a pile, and turns out awesome. Proportions matter, and staging of things also matters when you're talking about trying to maximize not only nutrient density but density of microbes and density of things like your growth stimulating compounds from things like kelp, maximal levels of things from your castings and your compost. So trying to work with all that stuff while you're building your soil versus kind of just chucking it all in a big thing and going, check, 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 check. We've kind of all in there equals good. All in there could equal good. And all in there in a certain sequence can equal better or betterest. And yes, some votes there for the biochar. Biochar's great. the studies on it are slightly mixed. And so if you read some of them and conclude that it's ineffective, then normally it's because they didn't quite treat it right. So I've kind of mentioned it before, but it needs to be pre-charged. So you need to add a protein source to it. And you need to add, preferably some microbes to it. There's a variety of different ways you can do that. We use some organic protein sources in the form of amendments, and we use microbes, IMO collections, to sort of charge ours up. And so, yeah, it's alive with stuff when it goes into the soil and ready to give back. One of the trouble with just adding it without pre-charging it is that it's going to suck up a lot of the power of your soil. It's effectively a battery, kind of a crude way of putting it, but it stores nutrients. And so if you throw it in there, it might suck up a lot of what's available effectively, and give it back eventually. But, your plants need it now, not yesterday. Is that a total fire ban on using biochar or making biochar? Because I would imagine that, if it's, that'd be very strange if they're not allowing you just to use it. But if they're allowing you to make it, if they're not allowing you to make it during a total fire ban, that kind of makes sense. And is one there is the this like the charcoal that you can buy for barbecues and things the same thing? And no, it's not really. No. So you specifically want biochar, not just charcoal. And wood ashes from your fire are not necessarily the same either, unfortunately. Wood ash and all the rest of it is very, very alkaline. And while it has a place sometimes in use as an input, I don't use a lot of it, nor recommend using a lot of it. It can be quite caustic. So yeah, there's that. Probably something that's better not added to your worm bin either. Something that's better composted. Making it, yeah. You don't be trying to make biochar in a total fire ban. It's a terrible idea. Talking about rice hulls too, actually, again with the rice hulls. One of the better uses of them is to carbonize them. So you'll find some videos on that, but it's the process effectively of kind of charring them up a bit, or charring them through, so that they turn into kind of like a fine, silica-rich material. Dude, I've seen people put briquettes in their soil, the charcoal briquettes. That's why I mention it. So don't do that. It's not going to help it. Just don't do that. It's not. Or put kitty litter. That's another one that I see. People are like, I think kitty litter is made of diatomite or something like that. Sometimes it's made of bentonite. It'll just turn to mud. It's not calcined enough, and so it's just going to turn to mud in there. Don't do it. What's a good way to check what your compost is like? Smell it. That's one of the first ways. For $100 and something bucks, some places will test it for you. Depending where you buy it, it might come with that. If it's your compost yourself, look, a lot of the time, if you know what's gone into it is good and you smell it and it smells good, it shouldn't smell bad. Like if it smells bad, it's bad. That's basically the rule. So if you know what you're putting in it is good, you know that all your sources of things are good. You're not just using lawn clippings that you've applied a bunch of bin dye to and weird synthetic fertilizers. Then it's probably fine as long as it looks well broken down and humified and smells nice. If you want to be really sure, then you can sort of go to the level of getting it analyzed and tested, and that'll kind of tell you some of the nutrient content. For a bit more, you can tell what the microbe content is. There's that sort of stuff you can go and do. And one there from Dactyos, they're suggesting to taste it. A few people messaged me about the tasting your soil for pH thing, saying that they would never, ever, ever do that. Ever. Which, that's fine. No worries. We can't all be, complete animals. And that is another way that some people will pre-charge their biochar, is mixing it with compost and allowing it to sort of even out that way. Jimbo. Should you use barbecue sauce if you use the barbecue briquettes? I mean, look, if you're going to do one, you should really just screw the whole thing up and do both. Who knows? I mean, two wrongs might make a right. It's made through the process of pyrolysis, and so, yeah, a low oxygen environment. Yeah, so that's why you want to have high carbon in your soil, so you can store up a lot of that fertilizer rather than just having it just sort of sitting there ready to burn things. So yeah, biochar is very, very good. Finer forms of it are good. Chunkier forms of it are good. I like a little bit of a mix of those, to be honest. Again, with the diversity. And yeah, no worries, Jimbo. You know, always happy to offer some completely useless and random techniques. G'day, David. How you going, mate? Yeah, correct. That's correct, Dankton. A few people that are PMing me at the moment. I am on the live. I shall get back to you when I am not on air. I'm on air. I need an on-air light somewhere outside the room or something like that. I don't have one of those yet. Right, so what did we go over? We went over foliar, we went over some stuff on rice hulls, a bit of stuff on biochar. Is there anything else that anyone would sort of like to bring up? We'll sort of hang around for another few minutes and then I'll go on about my day, I think, and let you all do the same. And I'm going good, David. It's nice to see you, mate. Here for another Sunday session. Looking very LA at the moment with the sunglasses, but I mean, honestly, the eye, it looks really bad. So it's just, this is better. Trust me. Even in potato, I looked in the camera thing and the thing, I'm like, man, that looks so bad. Hey, get some sunglasses. There you go. Someone might have a spare on air light for me. No, the light won't stop people DMing me. The light's just for me. It's just so that I can look up and go, look at that. I am on air. Isn't that cool? It's the little things in life, man. Because it's the little things that make up life. All right. Well, I think everybody is super awesome. Sorry if I missed anybody. Yeah, and actually that was a big one. So, you know, shout outs to the Australian government for making a slightly unexpected decision to support some psychedelic therapies. Yeah, it's important that those sort of things are supported and trials for those things are allowed to happen. They've been demonstrated to be useful for people as we discover or rediscover a lot of these plant-based medicines. It's interesting to see some of these other things that have been completely maligned or thrown to the wayside, getting some of their much needed recognition and respect for their use as therapeutic treatments for people, especially after, you know, a long time of demonization of people that have used them or people that have spoke out for them. So yeah, that's very, very good. Okay, well, I think I might have already been kicked off the Instagram, so just for now, we'll end it there, and I'll catch